Good morning. Thank you for joining me today. This morning we will be in Genesis, chapter 16, verse 1, through chapter 18, verse 9. Now, Sarai, Abram's wife, had not given birth to any children, but she had an Egyptian servant named Hagar. So Sarai said to Abram, "Since the Lord has prevented me from having children, have sexual relations with my servant. Perhaps I can have a family by her." Abram did what Sarai told him. So after Abram had lived in Canaan for 10 years, Sarai, Abram's wife, gave Hagar, her Egyptian servant, to her husband to be his wife. He had sexual relations with Hagar, and she became pregnant. Once Hagar realized she was pregnant, she despised Sarai. Then Sarai said to Abram, "You have brought this wrong on me. I allowed my servant to have sexual relations with you, but when she realized that she was pregnant, she despised me. May the Lord judge between you and me." Abram said to Sarai, "Since your servant is under your authority, do to her whatever you think best." Then Sarai treated Hagar harshly, so she ran away from Sarai. The Lord's angel found Hagar near a spring of water in the desert, the spring that is along the road to Shur. He said, "Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from, and where are you going?" She replied, "I'm running away from my mistress Sarai." Then the Lord's angel said to her, "Return to your mistress and submit to her authority. I will greatly multiply your descendants," the Lord's angel added, "so that they will be too numerous to count." Then the Lord's angel said to her, "You are now pregnant and are about to give birth to a son. You are to name him Ishmael, for the Lord has heard your painful groans. He will be a wild donkey of a man. He will be hostile to everyone, and everyone will be hostile to him. He will live away from his brothers." So Hagar named the Lord who spoke to her, "You are the God who sees me." For she said, "Here I have seen one who sees me." This is why the well was called Beer Laharoi. It is located between Kadesh and Bered. So Hagar gave birth to Abram's son, whom Abram named Ishmael. Now Abram was 86 years old when Hagar gave birth to Ishmael. When Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him and said, "I am the sovereign God. Walk before me and be blameless. Then I will confirm my covenant between me and you, and I will give you a multitude of descendants." Abram bowed down with his face to the ground, and God said to him, "As for me, this is my covenant with you. You will be the father of a multitude of nations. No longer will your name be Abram. Instead, your name will be Abraham, because I will make you the father of a multitude of nations. I will make you extremely fruitful. I will make nations of you, and kings will descend from you. I will confirm my covenant as a perpetual covenant between me and you. I will extend to your descendants after you throughout their generations. It will extend to your descendants after you throughout their generations. I will be your God, and the God of your descendants after you. I will give the whole land of Canaan, the land where you are now residing, to you and your descendants after you as a permanent possession. I will be their God." Then God said to Abraham, "As for you, you must keep the covenantal requirement I am imposing on you and your descendants after you throughout their generations. This is my requirement that you and your descendants after you must keep. Every male among you must be circumcised. You must circumcise the flesh of your foreskins. This will be a reminder of the covenant between me and you. Throughout your generations, every male among you who is 8 days old must be circumcised, whether born in your house or bought with money from any foreigner who is not one of your descendants. They must indeed be circumcised, whether born in your house or bought with money. The sign of my covenant will be visible in your flesh as a permanent reminder. Any uncircumcised male who has not been circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin will be cut off from his people. He has failed to carry out my requirement." Then God said to Abraham, "As for your wife, you must no longer call her Sarai. Sarah will be her name. I will bless her, and will give you a son through her. I will bless her, and she will become a mother of nations. Kings of countries will come from her." Then Abraham bowed down with his face to the ground and laughed as he said to himself, "Can a son be born to a man who is 100 years old? Can Sarah bear a child at the age of 90? Abraham said to God, "Oh, that Ishmael might live before you." God said, "No, Sarah your wife is going to bear you a son, and you will name him Isaac. I will confirm my covenant with him as a perpetual covenant for his descendants after him. As for Ishmael, I have heard you. I will indeed bless him, make him fruitful, and give him a multitude of descendants. He will become the father of 12 princes. I will make him into a great nation, but I will establish my covenant with Isaac, whom Sarah will bear to you at this set time next year." When he finished speaking with Abraham, God went up from him. Abraham took his son Ishmael and every male in his household, whether born in his house or bought with money, and circumcised them on that very same day, just as God had told him to do. Now Abraham was 99 years old when he was circumcised. His son Ishmael was 13 years old when he was circumcised. Abraham and his son Ishmael were circumcised on the very same day. All the men of his household, whether born in his household or bought with money from a foreigner, were circumcised with him. The Lord appeared to Abraham by the oaks of Mamre while he was sitting at the entrance to his tent during the hottest time of the day. Abraham looked up and saw 3 men standing across from him. When he saw them, he ran from the entrance of the tent to meet them and bowed low to the ground. He said, "My Lord, if I have found favor in your sight, do not pass by and leave your servant. Let a little water be brought so that you may all wash your feet and rest under the tree. And let me get a bit of food so that you may refresh yourselves, since you have passed by your servant's home. After that, you may be on your way." "All right," they replied. "You may do as you say." So Abraham hurried into the tent and said to Sarah, "Quick, take 3 measures of fine flour, knead it, and make bread." Then Abraham ran to the herd and chose a fine, tender calf, and gave it to a servant, who quickly prepared it. Abraham then took some curds and milk, along with the calf that had been prepared, and placed the food before them. They ate while he was standing near them under a tree. Then they asked him, "Where is Sarah, your wife?" He replied, "There in the tent." Kind of strange for it to cut off in the middle there like that, but oh well. Okay, so what do we have here? You have Sarai being upset that she hasn't borne any children, and her giving her handmaid, Hagar, to Abraham, Abram at this point, so that rather than Eliezer, the servant of the household, being the heir to Abram's estate, at least someone born in the house would be Abram's heir. But Hagar lords this over Sarai. So Sarai treats her poorly, and she flees from, Hagar flees from Sarai. But the Lord meets Sarai, or Hagar, and convinces her to go back to Sarai, and prophesies about Hagar's son, that he would be a wild donkey of a man, that he would be hostile to everyone, and everyone would be hostile to him. Yeah, and then 14 long years pass in between Ishmael's birth here and the next events that happen, where Abram is 99 years old, and he still has the promise of sons born through Sarai. And then God speaks to him, says, "I am the sovereign God, walk before me and be blameless. Then I will confirm my covenant between me and you, and I will give you a multitude of descendants." And he promises that this time next year, Sarah will bear a child. And he gives them the covenant of circumcision. And then in this last chapter that we read, in chapter 18, you have the Lord appearing to Abraham by the oaks of Mamre. And how did the Lord appear to him? In 18:2, well, in 18:1, the Lord appeared to Abraham by the oaks of Mamre while he was sitting at the entrance to his tent. How did the Lord appear to him? 18:2, Abraham looked up and saw 3 men standing across from him. And he refers to them as my Lord. In 18:3, my Lord, if I have found favor in your sight, do not pass by and leave your servant. And how do they reply? Not one at a time, but in unison, it would seem. It says, after that you may be on your way. All right, they replied, you may do as you say. Then they asked him, where is Sarah, your wife? They're in the tent. Yeah. So, I would say that this is a manifestation of the Trinity to Abraham here. A theophany. Let's see what Guzik has to say. Please go into my maid. Perhaps I shall obtain children by her. Sarai encouraged Abraham to take part in what was, in that day, essentially a surrogate mother arrangement. According to custom, the child would be considered to be the child of Abram and Sarai, not Abram and Hagar. Sarai could justify this as a way to fulfill God's promise. Abram, God promised that you would be the father of many nations, and he didn't specifically mention me. Maybe you're the father of many nations, but I'm not the mother. Nevertheless, this was against God's will for many reasons. It was a sin of unbelief in God and his promise. Sarai believed in God's sovereignty over the womb, then acted against it. It was a sin against God's plan for marriage, that one man and one woman come together in a one-flesh relationship. It was a sin against Abram and Sarai's marriage. This surrogacy wasn't done in a doctor's office, but in a bedroom. Yeah. Abram heeded the voice of Sarai. Sarai wasn't the first woman to be tormented by the thought, maybe my husband would be better off with someone else. It was bad for Sarai to hold on to that thought. It was much worse for Abram to heed the voice of Sarai on this matter. When we impatiently try to fulfill God's promises in our own effort, it accomplishes nothing and may even prolong the time until the promise is fulfilled. Jacob had to live as an exile for 25 years because he thought he had to arrange the fulfillment of God's promise to get his father's blessing. Moses had to tend sheep for 40 years in the desert after he tried to arrange the fulfillment of God's promise by murdering an Egyptian. It is much better to receive God's help than to try and help him with our own wisdom and even unbelief. The angel of the Lord found her by the spring of water. Hagar's escape led her to a spring. Perhaps she was afraid to go further and leave the supply of water. In her difficulty, the angel of the Lord met her. Yeah, and this is another instance of the angel of the Lord being stated as God. me see here. The Lord's angel found Hagar near a spring of water in the desert. He said, Hagar, servant of Sarai, where have you come from? Where are you going? The Lord's angel said to her, return to your mistress and submit to her authority. Yeah. So Hagar named the Lord who spoke to her. That is, it's in all caps, Yahweh, who spoke to her. So Hagar references that this is Yahweh who's speaking to her. And Moses afterwards, who's writing this down, confirms that this is the Lord who spoke to her by saying, so Hagar named the Lord who spoke to her, you are the God who sees me. Here I have seen one who sees me. So, showing that it's actually Yahweh who is approaching her. When God himself is physically present, we understand that it is a pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus Christ. We understand this because of God the Father. It says, no one has seen God at any time, in John 1:18. The only begotten Son, who is in the bosom of the Father, he has declared him. And no man has ever seen God in the person of the Father, in 1 Timothy 6:16. Therefore, if God physically appeared and spoke as one person to another in the Old Testament, we understand this is an appearance of the eternal Son, the second person of the Trinity, before his incarnation in Bethlehem. The name Ishmael, you shall call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has heard your affliction. The name Ishmael means God will hear. We may take this as a prompting to pray for revival and spiritual awakening among the Arab peoples, because when they cry out to Jesus, God will hear. Yeah. And certainly God is working amongst the Arab peoples today, and that I've often heard of them being brought to Christ by dreams and visions, which are, the dreams and visions are of like Jesus Christ and him reaching for them in that way. Hagar bore Abram a son. Apparently Hagar did return with a submitted heart. She told the whole story to Abram and Sarai, and Abram named the child Ishmael, just as instructed in the meeting with the angel of the Lord. I will make my covenant between me and you, that is, between God and Abraham. God also reminded Abram he had not forgotten the covenant, though it had been some 25 years since the promise was first made, and though it may be seemed to Abram God forgot, God didn't forget anything. To encourage Abram's faith in the promise of descendants through Sarai, God changed Abram's name from Abram, father of many, to Abraham, father of many nations. There was no doubt a sense in which Abram, father of many, was a hard name to bear for a man who was the father of none, especially in a culture where inquiry about one's personal life was a courteous practice. Now God went a step further and made his name father of many nations. It was almost crazy for a childless man to have such a name. God gives us many names in faith: saint, righteous, chosen, royal priesthood, sons of God, and so forth. and he knows he will accomplish the meaning of the name in us, even if it seems somewhat crazy. Father of many nations, exceedingly fruitful, make nations of you, and kings shall come from you. In almost every dimension, God made the long-delayed promise to Abraham greater. Never before had God specifically said that multiple nations would come from Abraham. A singular nation was promised in Genesis 12:2. Never before had God specifically said that kings would descend from Abraham. Yeah. This is my covenant which you shall keep. God introduced the command regarding circumcision with these words: the cutting and removal of the foreskin of every male among Abraham's covenant descendants would mark them as those who were in the covenant. Since this covenant was made with the literal genetic descendants of Abraham through the promise of God, it was appropriate that this sign of the covenant be given to those born into the covenant and was associated with the reproductive part of their body. Every male child among you shall be circumcised. For the first time, God gave Abraham something to do in regard to the covenant. He told him that his descendants must take upon themselves the sign of the covenant, showing they received by the covenant by faith. Circumcision was not unknown in the world at that time. It was a ritual practiced among various people. Because circumcision deals with the organ of procreation, it was a reminder of the special seed of Abraham, which would ultimately bring the Messiah. Interesting connection there. The uncircumcised male child, he has broken my covenant. Those who rejected circumcision rejected the sign of the covenant. They were no friends of the covenant made with Abraham. It wasn't that circumcision made them a part of the covenant, faith did, but rejection of circumcision was a rejection of the covenant. Unfortunately, through the centuries, the Jews began to trust more in the sign of the covenant, circumcision, than in the God of the covenant, believing that circumcision by itself was sufficient and necessary to save. Paul refutes this idea extensively, especially in the light of the finished work of Jesus. Therefore, Christians are free to either circumcise or not. One may do so for social or hygienic reasons, but it doesn't get us any closer to God. For in Christ, Jesus, neither circumcision nor uncircumcision avails anything, but faith works through love. Again, Paul spoke of circumcision and baptism in Colossians 2:11-12, connecting them without saying they are the same thing. In this sense, at least, they are connected. Circumcision did not save a Jewish man, but refusing to be circumcised meant disobedience to the covenant, and perhaps rejection of it. In the same sense, being baptized does not save us, but no Christian should refuse baptism. Isaac. The son will be named Isaac, laughter, because he would be such a joy to his parents, but also to always remind Abraham he laughed at God's promise to give him a son through Sarah at his late age. Yeah, and Sarah later, too, did so. The very same day Abraham was circumcised. Abraham's obedience was complete, every male among the men of Abraham's house. It was prompt, that very same day, and it was daring to virtually incapacitate all his fighting men at the same time. Abraham didn't need to pray about this. He didn't need to grow or transition into this. God said it, and he did it. This is a wonderful example of obedience from a great man of faith. Yeah. God appeared to Abraham near the terebinth trees of Mamre. This was a significant place in Abraham's life. Abraham moved to Mamre when he came back into the Promised Land from Egypt and built an altar there, and apparently stayed there some time. Abraham purchased a field and cave at Mamre, using it for Sarah's burial. Abraham himself was buried there, and his son Isaac was also buried there. Yeah. Sarah had passed the age of childbearing. By all outward... Oh, this is for later on, I suppose. Yeah. Suppose that's it. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. Hope you have a great day. Bye.